Annie, sweetie, could you please move? You're blocking the photographer's shot of the important family members. The words hit like a slap, delivered with that sickeningly sweet tone Aunt Margaret had perfected over 30 years of casual cruelty. Annie Huang froze in place, her champagne glass trembling in her hand as 200 wedding guests turned to stare. She'd been standing with her parents, trying to blend into the background of her twin sister Sophia's reception, when Margaret's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. Not again. Not today. The thought crashed through Annie's mind as she watched her mother's face flush with embarrassment. Dad simply looked away, as he always did when the family's unspoken hierarchy was on display. Sophia, radiant in her designer gown, didn't even glance over from where she posed with her new husband. Why would she? This was exactly how things were supposed to be. Of course, Annie whispered, stepping back into the shadows between the towering floral arrangements. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, but she ignored it. The last thing she needed was another reminder of how alone she was in this moment. The photographer adjusted his lens, capturing the important relatives, the successful ones, the ones with prestigious careers and perfect lives. Annie's throat tightened as she watched her cousin David step into her former spot, his pharmaceutical company's latest IPO having apparently earned him a place in the family portrait. 28 years old and still the spare. The bitter thought had barely formed when her phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Poor Annie, came a stage whisper from behind her. Still single, still struggling with that little tutoring business. Remember when they were kids? We all thought the twins would both turn out successful, but... The voice trailed off with a meaningful sigh that said everything the speaker wouldn't dare vocalize directly. Annie's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging crescents into her palms. The tutoring business wasn't little. She'd built it from nothing and helped over 300 students get into their dream colleges. But standing here, surrounded by investment bankers and surgeons and tech entrepreneurs, her life's work felt as insignificant as everyone believed it to be. Her phone vibrated a third time. This time, she looked. Emergency at the airport. Flight delayed, but I'm coming. Don't let them break you down before I get there. You're stronger than all of them combined. Annie's breath caught. Nathaniel wasn't supposed to be here. They'd agreed it was too soon, too complicated. Her family didn't even know he existed. She'd learned long ago to keep the good things in her life private, away from their toxic tendency to diminish everything she touched. Annie. Sophia's voice rang out across the reception hall. Come here for a second. Here we go. Annie forced a smile and approached the bridal party, her sister's friends clustering around Sophia like expensive accessories. The bride's eyes were bright with champagne and something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. Everyone, I want you to meet my twin sister Annie, Sophia announced, her arm sliding around Annie's waist with false warmth. She's the artistic one in the family. Still figuring things out, aren't you, sweetie? The condescension was wrapped in silk, but it cut just as deep as Margaret's earlier dismissal. Annie felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck as Sophia's friends offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from. Some stories are too close to my heart to share on YouTube. I send those, along with little life lessons and surprises, to my email circle. If you'd like to be part of it, you can join with the link in the description. You want to know what's disgusting? Luke's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it filled the entire room. It's not my wife's success story. It's not that she built something beautiful from nothing. It's you, Mother. It's the fact that you can look at the woman I love, the woman who makes me laugh every single day, who cooks for my friends, who held your hand when you had pneumonia last winter, and reduce her to nothing but her bank account and the color of her skin. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Margaret's face went white, then flushed red. How dare you suggest? This has nothing to do with. Doesn't it? Luke pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. Because I'm looking at the security footage from your country club right now. From last month's charity gala. The one where you told Mrs. Henderson, and I quote, that I was going through a phase with that black girl, and that you were sure it would pass once I came to my senses. Aisha felt the room tilt. She'd been at that gala, had spent 2 hours getting ready, had worn Luke's grandmother's pearls, had smiled and made small talk while Margaret had been. Luke. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Love and fury and something else, determination that felt like a promise. Because you're my wife. You're my family. And no one, gets to treat my family like this. He turned back to Margaret, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of finality that comes with burned bridges. We're leaving. Tonight. And we won't be back. Luke, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. Luke reached for Aisha's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers like a lifeline. You want to know what Aisha really is, Mother? She's the woman who brings soup to my office when I'm working late. She's the person who remembers every story I tell her about my patients and asks about them weeks later. She's brilliant and kind and funny, and she makes me want to be better than I am. His grip on Aisha's hand tightened. But more than that, she's my wife. Which means when you attack her, you attack me. When you disrespect her, you disrespect me. And when you reduce her to a stereotype because you can't stand that your son fell in love with someone who doesn't look like your country club friends, well, that tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around the table, Luke's siblings stared in shocked silence. His father, Senator Whitman, hadn't moved since Margaret started her attack, his face carved from stone. You're making a mistake, Margaret said finally, her voice shaking. A terrible mistake. When this little infatuation ends, when reality sets in, don't come crawling back to us. Luke was already helping Aisha to her feet, his hand steady on her back as her legs threatened to give out. The only mistake I made was waiting this long to stand up to you. He looked around the table one last time, his gaze lingering on his younger brother Kevin, who couldn't meet his eyes. Anyone who wants to remain part of my life knows where to find me. Anyone who agrees with what just happened. He shrugged. I guess I finally know where we stand. Aisha barely remembered walking to the car. Her mind kept replaying Margaret's words, the hatred in her voice, the satisfaction on some of the faces around that table. People she'd cooked for, had Christmas with, had tried so hard to win over. It wasn't until they were in Luke's car, the Whitman mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror, that the magnitude of what had just happened hit her. Luke had just sacrificed everything for her. His family, his inheritance, his place in the only world he'd ever known. The raw vulnerability in his voice had broken through every defensive wall Annie had built around her heart. She'd agreed to meet 15-year-old Tyler that same evening, expecting a standard prep session. Instead, she'd found a brilliant kid drowning in grief, living with an uncle who worked 18-hour days and blamed himself for not knowing how to help. That first session had turned into 3 months of intensive mentoring. Nathaniel had insisted on paying triple her usual rate, but it wasn't until Annie accidentally saw his driver's license, Nathaniel Brooks, as in Brook Tech Industries, that she realized she'd been tutoring the nephew of one of the most powerful men in the state. Annie. Grandma Rose's voice cut through her memories. Who is that man, and why is he looking at you like you hung the moon? Before Annie could answer, Sophia appeared at her side with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. Annie, who is this? You didn't mention bringing anyone. The accusation in her twin's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Asterisk, how dare you upstage me at my own wedding? Asterisk, the unspoken words hung between them like a blade. Nathaniel reached their small circle and smiled, but Annie caught the flash of something dangerous in his eyes as he took in Sophia's territorial stance. You must be the bride. Congratulations on your special day. His voice was polite, controlled, but Annie knew him well enough to recognize the steel beneath the silk. Nathaniel had built his empire by reading people's weaknesses in seconds, and Sophia was practically broadcasting hers. This is my sister's friend, Sophia said, the pause loaded with dismissive implication. Annie, you really should have mentioned you were bringing someone. The seating chart. Actually, Nathaniel interrupted smoothly, I'm not here as Annie's +1. I'm here because I have something important to discuss with her. Annie's stomach dropped. They'd talked about keeping their relationship private until she was ready to face her family's inevitable judgment. Nathaniel understood her need for control, for building something real before exposing it to their toxic dynamics. So why was he here, making a scene at the worst possible moment? Nathaniel, she said quietly, what are you doing? His expression softened as he looked at her. Something I should have done months ago, if I hadn't been so worried about pressuring you. The jewelry box in his companion's hands suddenly felt like a loaded weapon. Annie's breath caught as pieces began falling into place. The flowers. The formal suits. The way Nathaniel was looking at her like she was the only person in the room. No. Not here. Not like this. You see, Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying just enough to reach the nearby tables. I've spent the last 6 months falling in love with the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She's brilliant, compassionate, and she's built something extraordinary from nothing but determination and heart. Sophia's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, a cold fury that Annie recognized from childhood battles over toys and attention. I'm sorry, but who exactly are you? The question was meant to cut, to establish that Nathaniel was nobody worth knowing. But the man beside Annie smiled, and something in that expression made Annie's blood run cold with premonition. Nathaniel Brooks, he said simply. Perhaps you've heard of Brook Tech Industries. The color drained from Sophia's face. Around them, conversations stopped mid-sentence as the name registered with various guests. Annie watched her uncle's eyes go wide, saw her cousin David's jaw drop, and realized with mounting horror that Nathaniel had just detonated a social nuclear bomb. Brook Tech Industries. The company that had revolutionized sustainable technology and made its founder one of the youngest billionaires in the country. The same Nathaniel who'd sat in her tiny kitchen learning to make dumplings, who'd cried in her arms after Tyler's first successful college interview, who'd never once made her feel small or inadequate. That's impossible, Sophia whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. She was staring at Nathaniel like he'd sprouted wings, and Annie could practically see her calculating the implications. Why would it be impossible? Nathaniel asked, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. That Annie would be with someone successful? That she would be valued by someone who understands her worth? The words hit their target with surgical precision. Sophia's face flushed red, then went white, her composure cracking like expensive porcelain. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Isn't it? The challenge in Nathaniel's voice was quiet but unmistakable. Around them, Annie could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, the whispered conversations spreading like wildfire. Her family's carefully constructed hierarchy was crumbling in real time, and Nathaniel was the wrecking ball. Nathaniel, stop, Annie said urgently, grabbing his arm. This isn't what I wanted. He turned to her, and the love in his eyes was so fierce it took her breath away. I know, but I'm tired of watching them treat you like you're less than you are. I'm tired of hiding what we have because you're afraid they'll find a way to ruin it. They will ruin it, Annie whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in her chest. They ruin everything good in my life. That's why I didn't tell them about you. Annie. Nathaniel's voice was infinitely gentle as he reached up to cup her face. They can't ruin this unless we let them. And I'll be damned if I let anyone make you feel small ever again. Behind them, Sophia made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. This is insane. Annie doesn't. She can't. I mean, look at her compared to. She gestured vaguely at herself, resplendent in her designer gown, and Annie felt the familiar sting of comparison. Even now, even with Nathaniel looking at her like she was precious beyond measure, the old wounds opened effortlessly. Compared to what? Nathaniel's voice had gone deadly quiet. Compared to someone who spent her entire life tearing down the person who should be her greatest ally? Compared to someone who measures worth by bank accounts and social status instead of character and heart? You don't understand our family, Sophia began. I understand bullies, Nathaniel cut her off. And I understand that Annie has spent her entire life being told she's not enough by people who couldn't dream of achieving what she has. What has she achieved? The words exploded from Sophia like venom. She tutors kids. She lives in a rental apartment. She drives a car that's older than some of her students. The cruel words hung in the air like smoke, and Annie felt something inside her chest crack open. All her old insecurities came flooding back. The years of being the other twin, the disappointing daughter, the family member they tolerated but never celebrated. But Nathaniel didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, and it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Annie had ever seen. She achieved something you never will, he said quietly. She built a life based on who she is, not who she thinks she should be. She earned every success through her own merit. And she did it all while carrying the weight of a family that never appreciated her. He turned back to Annie, and suddenly the rest of the room ceased to exist. You saved Tyler. Did you know that? He told me last week that meeting you changed his life, that you didn't just help him get into college, you helped him believe he deserved to be there. Annie's eyes filled with tears. Tyler had been like a little brother to her, all gangly limbs and fierce intelligence wrapped in grief too heavy for his young shoulders. You save everyone you touch, Nathaniel continued. You saved me. Nathaniel, let me finish. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. I came here tonight because I couldn't wait another day to tell you that I love you. Not just love, I'm completely, irrevocably in love with you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Behind them, someone gasped. Annie heard her mother's sharp intake of breath, saw her father's stunned expression in her peripheral vision. But all of that faded as Nathaniel dropped to one knee. The jewelry box opened with a soft click, revealing a ring that caught the light like captured starfire. But it wasn't the obvious display of wealth that made Annie's heart stop. It was the look in Nathaniel's eyes, vulnerable and hopeful and absolutely certain. Annie Huang, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent reception hall. Will you marry me? And that's when Annie realized the most devastating truth of all. In trying to protect their relationship from her family's toxicity, she'd been protecting the wrong thing. The real betrayal wasn't what they might do to her love for Nathaniel. It was what she'd been doing to herself all along. The silence stretched like a held breath. 200 pairs of eyes focused on Annie as she stared down at the man who'd just upended her entire world. The ring glittered between them, not just a piece of jewelry, but a declaration of war against everything her family had ever believed about her worth. I. Annie's voice caught in her throat. The word yes was right there, desperate to break free, but 28 years of conditioning held it hostage. What if this is too good to be true? What if he changes his mind when he really sees what my family is like? Annie, sweetheart. Her mother's voice cut through the moment like a blade, sharp with barely contained panic. Perhaps you and your friend should discuss this privately. Her friend. Nathaniel's voice remained calm, but Annie caught the dangerous edge beneath the silk. He rose smoothly to his feet, the ring box still open in his hand. Mrs. Huang, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not Annie's friend. I'm the man who's been in love with your daughter for 6 months. Dad stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that looked suspiciously like calculation. Mr. Brooke, we appreciate you, honoring Annie with your attention, but surely this is moving rather fast. Fast? Nathaniel's eyebrows rose. We've been together for 6 months. I've met her friends, her colleagues, her students. The only people I haven't met are her family. And frankly, after tonight, I'm beginning to understand why. The words landed like grenades. Annie watched her father's face cycle through shock, hurt, and finally, a cold anger she'd only seen a few times in her life. That's rather presumptuous of you to judge us based on one evening. Is it? Nathaniel turned slightly, addressing the wider circle of family members who'd gravitated toward the drama like moths to flame. Because from where I'm standing, I've watched you spend the last hour systematically humiliating one of the most accomplished women I've ever known. Accomplished? Uncle Richard laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Nathaniel, may I call you Nathaniel? I think you may have an inflated sense of Annie's achievements. She runs a small tutoring service. She built a business that has a 97% college acceptance rate and has generated over $2 million in revenue in the past 3 years. The number hit the crowd reached my desk. Annie felt her own eyes widen. A proposal that was never calculated lost in our internal mail system. Had never thought to present her success in terms that would matter to her family's business so devastating Annie could barely process. That's impossible. Her family hadn't just been undermining her conviction. They'd been actively sabotaging her professional opportunities for Nathaniel's attention shifted to the bride. Nathaniel said softly, and Annie saw something predatory to understand his expression. Everything from what I've observed tonight, every conversation, sharing good news every moment, with his family seems to be an exercise in masochism. The investigation into your family was Sophia said desperately. I fell in love with you completely independent. We're not trying to hurt Annie about their sabotage. We're trying to protect her. Annie stood up. She's always been pacing to the window that overlooked the city. Someone has to keep her grounded. Her family was probably planning their next reality. Their next way to ensure she stayed broken and dependent. But the steel in his voice made several people step back. Last night, reality where she's less than you. They already knew where her accomplishments don't count because they had the timeline ready, the accusations of accomplishments. They weren't protecting me from making a face crumble, and they were protecting themselves. She caught a glimpse of something she'd never seen before. genuine fear. She turned to face him. Not fear of Nathaniel saw something new in her expression, but fear of losing something not the broken woman who'd thrown his ring at his feet. She needs me to be less than her. Stronger. Realization forged in the fire of absolute clarity. I want copies of everything down because she doesn't love me. Every document. She's keeping me down because she doesn't know who she is without being the successful twin. What are you planning to do, Sophia? Annie's smile was sharp as a blade. The pieces finally. I'm going to give my family a choice. This isn't about can back off and let me live my life. It's about I can make their sabotage public and let the twins face to their social circle. That's why they've spent 3 years trying to destroy Annie's voice grew stronger as understanding Nathaniel stepped closer to her. You need me to be the failure so you can be the success. Once you take this step, you need me to be the disappointment so you can be the golden child. She looked at him. But what happens to your identity when I'm not playing past the expensive suit and corporate power? The words hung in the air like an 2 years admiring her work. And Annie watched 28 years of family dynamics fallen in love with her mind before he'd ever seen her face. She could see the man who'd been investigating her family sabotage the information against her. The way Sophia always managed to redirect conversations away from Annie's I have something I need to say. The family's willingness to dismiss anything that didn't fit their carefully constructed The words came from the deepest part of her soul, Sophia said. I'm sorry I believe her voice was shaking trusting what I knew about We're twins. I'm sorry I let 28 years of conditioning override Nathaniel 6 months stepped closer to Annie. I'm sorry I threw your ring away instead of fighting for us. Because I've spent Nathaniel 6 months watching her doubt her strides. Watching her minimize her accomplishments. Annie, watching her have nothing to apologize for. Good things. Nothing. And now I see where that comes from. What they've been doing to you. You don't know anything about our family. The words exploded from Sophia with unexpected violence. I love you so much you don't know what it was like growing up. I'm tired of being afraid of constantly. You don't know what it's like to have a twin. His voice was rough with emotion. She stopped abruptly. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce heart, but the damage was done. Determination. The admission hung between them like a smoking crater. Annie pulled back to look at him. Annie asked, "What if I told you I'm done trying to save everyone else? A twin who what? What if I told you I'm ready to fight for myself for once? I didn't mean." Nathaniel's smile was radiant. A twin who was smarter. I'd say the question came from Grandma Rose, and I'd say that anyone who tries through the tension is going to have to go through me first. A twin who won the spelling bee. Annie stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. A twin who got into Harvard 3 years turned it down to stay close. 6 months of real love. Annie felt the blood drain clarity into the connection. She'd never told anyone about when they broke apart. Nathaniel pulled the engagement ring from his pocket, staring at her grandmother. He'd been carrying it since the previous night. I made you promise never to tell anyone, unable to give up hope. And you told them. Annie Huang. Honey, he said, they're your family. Going down on one knee right there in his office. They deserve to marry me? Not for Annie's voice was rising now. Not for redemption. 28 years of any reason except that I love you and want to spend the rest of my life. That I turned down Harvard because I was afraid of leaving Sophia behind. That I chose State University because I thought staying the word close to home was the right thing to do. But first, I've spent my entire adult life making myself smaller. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger. The silence that followed was deafening. Together. Annie could see the shock on her parents' faces. For the first time in her life, the dawning understanding Annie felt like she had someone truly on something that looked like panic. The war with her family was about to begin. Annie. But she was no longer fighting it alone. You never said, "We thought you didn't get in." Because I let you think that. The words tore from her throat. Because it was easier than watching Sophia fall apart when she got waitlisted. Because I thought being a good sister meant sacrificing my dreams for hers. Nathaniel's hand found hers, warm and steady and absolutely certain. And that, he said quietly, is exactly why I fell in love with you. Not in spite of your loyalty, but because of it. The difference is, I want to be worthy of that loyalty. I want to build something with you, not tear you down to make myself feel better. He turned to face the assembled family, and Annie saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made in real time. Here's what's going to happen. Annie is going to give me an answer to my proposal. If she says yes, we're going to plan the most spectacular engagement party this city has ever seen, and you're all invited. If she says no, I'll respect her decision and leave. He paused, his gaze moving deliberately from face to face. But either way, the days of treating her like she's less than she is? Those days are over. Because I won't stand by and watch the woman I love be diminished by people who should be celebrating her. Annie felt something break open in her chest, not a wound, but a chrysalis. For the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. Not fighting to save her or protect her or fix her, but fighting for her right to be exactly who she was. She looked at Nathaniel, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and the shocking proposal to the man who'd sat in her kitchen at midnight helping her prepare lesson plans for Tyler. The man who'd driven across 3 states to find a specialist book for one of her students. The man who'd held her while she cried about feeling invisible and had never once suggested she was overreacting. "Yes," she said, and her voice carried across the silent reception hall like a bell. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger with perfect certainty, And as Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, Annie heard something that would haunt her for weeks to come. Sophia, sobbing like her heart was breaking, whispered, "She was always the better one. I couldn't let anyone else see it." But the confession was drowned out by the sound of applause, tentative at first, then building into something that sounded almost like redemption. Almost. Because as Annie kissed her fiancé in front of her stunned family, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Some victories, she was about to learn, came with a price none of them were prepared to pay. The applause died away, but the tension in the room remained thick enough to cut. Annie stood with Nathaniel's arm around her waist, the engagement ring catching the light like a beacon, and watched her family's faces cycle through a fascinating array of emotions. What she saw there made her stomach clench with unease. Her mother wore the expression she'd perfected during Annie's childhood. The smile that said *, "We'll discuss this privately later." *. Her father kept glancing between Nathaniel and his phone, and Annie caught him typing rapidly under the table. Uncle Richard was whispering urgently to his wife, while Aunt Margaret looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. But it was Sophia's face that worried her most. Her twin had gone eerily calm, the tears dried, replaced by something Annie recognized from their teenage years. The calculating look that preceded Sophia's most devastating strikes. "Well," Sophia said, her voice bright and brittle as glass, "this is certainly unexpected. Nathaniel, you must tell us how you two met. Annie's been so secretive about her love life." The innocent question was loaded with landmines, and Annie felt Nathaniel tense beside her. They'd agreed on a cover story months ago, something simple about meeting at a coffee shop. But now, with her family's predatory attention focused on them, even that felt dangerous. "We met through my nephew Tyler," Nathaniel said smoothly. Annie was tutoring him for college applications. "Tyler?" Dad's eyebrows rose. "I don't recall Annie mentioning tutoring anyone by that name. Because I stopped telling you about my students after you called them other people's problem children." Annie thought, but she kept her expression neutral. "Tyler's been working with me for months. He got into MIT early admission." "MIT?" Sophia's voice sharpened with interest. "That's impressive. Nathaniel, your nephew must be exceptionally bright." "He is." Nathaniel's tone was carefully neutral, but Annie caught the subtle shift in his posture. He's had some challenges, but Annie saw his potential when no one else would. Challenges? This from Uncle Richard, who'd built his legal career on finding weaknesses to exploit. What kind of challenges? Annie felt the conversation sliding into dangerous territory. Tyler's story wasn't hers to tell, and Nathaniel looked like he was fighting the same instinct to protect the boy's privacy. "Just the usual teenage stuff," Annie said quickly. "Sometimes brilliant kids need someone who understands how their minds work." But Richard wasn't satisfied. "It's interesting that Annie never mentioned working with your nephew specifically, Nathaniel. Usually she's quite enthusiastic about her success stories." The implication hung in the air like poison. Usually she brags about the few times she actually succeeds. Annie felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Then Nathaniel's phone rang. Then both phones started chiming in rapid succession. "Excuse me," Nathaniel said, glancing at his screen. His face went pale. "I need to take this." He stepped away, but not far enough. Annie could hear fragments of his conversation, words that made her blood run cold. "How did they get the story?" "No comment, security detail, immediately." "Annie," Sophia said sweetly, her voice cutting through Annie's growing panic, "you look worried. Is everything all right?" Before Annie could answer, her own phone exploded with notifications. Text after text, notification after notification, until the screen was a blur of alerts. With trembling fingers, she opened the first message. It was from her friend Jessica, a photo attached. "Girl, why didn't you tell me you were dating Nathaniel Brooks? It's all over social media, *. The photo was a screenshot from Instagram, the moment Nathaniel had gone down on one knee, captured by someone in the wedding crowd and already going viral. The caption read, "Billionaire surprise proposal at wedding. Nathaniel Brooks proposes to mystery woman, *. Annie's stomach dropped as she scrolled through more messages. Twitter was exploding. Instagram stories were spreading like wildfire. Someone had live-streamed the proposal, and it was being shared across every platform imaginable. "Oh no," she whispered. "What is it, sweetheart?" Her mother appeared at her side, but there was something predatory in her concern. "You look upset." Annie showed her the phone, watching her mother's eyes widen as she took in the scope of the viral sensation. Within seconds, her mother was pulling out her own device, fingers flying across the screen. "Mom, what are you doing?" "Just checking something, dear." But her mother's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh my! Annie, did you know that Nathaniel Brooks is involved in some sort of business controversy? Something about a merger that fell through? The comments are quite illuminating." Annie grabbed the phone, scanning the comments her mother had pulled up. Most were congratulatory, but buried in the thread were other things. Accusations about insider trading. Questions about a failed acquisition that had cost investors millions. Speculation about whether the proposal was a publicity stunt to distract from business troubles. "That's ridiculous," Annie said, but doubt was already creeping in. "Nathaniel would never." "Of course not, darling." Her mother's voice was honey over arsenic. "I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Although, it is interesting that he chose to propose so publicly, don't you think? Right when these business rumors are circulating." "Margaret." Grandma Rose's voice cut through the growing chaos. "That's enough." But the damage was done. Annie could feel the poisonous seeds of doubt taking root, and she hated herself for it. 6 months of knowing Nathaniel, of seeing his integrity in action, and one comment from her mother was enough to make her question everything. Nathaniel returned, his face grim. "Annie, we need to go. Now." "What's wrong?" "Someone leaked our engagement to the press before we could control the narrative. My security team is recommending we leave immediately." "Security team?" Sophia's voice was sharp with mock concern. "Annie, did you know Nathaniel has security issues? That sounds dangerous." "It's standard for someone in his position," Annie said, but she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. How much about Nathaniel's life did she really know? They'd spent months building their relationship in private, intimate moments, but she'd never seen the full scope of his public persona. "Of course," Dad said smoothly, "though it's unfortunate that Annie's being dragged into such a complicated situation. Perhaps it would be better to take some time, think this through." "No." Nathaniel's voice was steel. "We're not taking time, and we're not thinking this through. Annie and I are getting married, and anyone who has a problem with that can." His phone rang again, the sound cutting through his words. He answered with visible frustration. "What now?" "What do you mean Tyler's missing?" "Since when?" "Find him. Now." Annie's blood turned to ice. "Tyler's missing." Nathaniel's face was white. He was supposed to be at his dorm, but his roommate says he never came back from classes yesterday. Campus security is looking, but... He ran a hand through his hair. He's been getting death threats since the news broke about his acceptance to MIT. People found out about his parents, started saying he didn't deserve his spot because of sympathy. Death threats. Annie felt the room spin around her. "Nathaniel, this is my fault. If I hadn't..." "Stop." His hands cupped her face, grounding her. "This is not your fault. Tyler's been dealing with trolls for weeks. I should have told you, but I didn't want you to worry." "You should have told me." The words escaped before Annie could stop them, and she saw something flicker in Nathaniel's eyes. "What else haven't you told me?" The question hung between them like a chasm, and Annie realized that her family was watching this moment with undisguised fascination. They were feeding on the cracks appearing in her happiness, and she was letting them. "Annie," Sophia said softly, "maybe Dad's right. Maybe you should take some time to really get to know Nathaniel before making such a big decision. I mean, 6 months isn't very long, and there seem to be aspects of his life you weren't aware of." "Sophia, stop." Annie's voice was sharp, but the damage was spreading. Every word of doubt was finding fertile ground in soil her family had been preparing for 28 years. Nathaniel's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, and his expression went from worried to furious. "You have got to be kidding me." "What now?" He showed her the screen. It was a news alert, asterisk sources close to the family question Reeves' engagement. She had no idea who he really was. Asterisk. Annie stared at the headline, then slowly turned to look at her family. They were all looking back at her with various expressions of innocence, but she caught her father quickly shoving his phone into his pocket. "Which one of you?" Her voice was deadly quiet. "Which one of you is talking to reporters?" "Annie, sweetheart, we would never," her mother began. "Which one of you?" The shout erupted from somewhere deep in Annie's chest, silencing the entire reception hall. Nathaniel stepped closer to her, his presence solid and protective. "It doesn't matter. Let's go. Tyler needs us, and this circus isn't helping anything." But as they started toward the exit, Sophia's voice stopped them cold. Annie, wait. There's something else you should know. About Nathaniel and Tyler. Nathaniel went rigid beside her. Sophia, don't. Don't what? Annie turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Don't what, Nathaniel? Sophia smiled, and it was the most terrible thing Annie had ever seen. Ask him about Tyler's trust fund, Annie. Ask him why a billionaire's nephew was living in poverty until 3 months ago. Ask him what really happened to Tyler's parents. The world tilted sideways. Annie looked at Nathaniel, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything that would make this make sense. Instead, she saw guilt. Nathaniel. Her voice was barely a whisper. What is she talking about? And that's when Annie realized that everything she thought she knew about the man she'd just agreed to marry might have been built on a foundation of lies. The engagement ring suddenly felt like a shackle around her finger, and the applause from earlier seemed like it had happened in another lifetime. Because the worst betrayals, she was learning, always came from the people you trusted most. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Nathaniel's face had gone ashen, and Annie felt something cold and terrible spreading through her chest as she watched him struggle for words that wouldn't come. Nathaniel. Her voice was barely audible. What is Sophia talking about? He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. That single gesture, the inability to meet her eyes, told Annie everything she needed to know. Her legs felt suddenly unsteady. Sophia, Nathaniel said quietly, his voice hoarse. Please don't do this. Not here. Not like this. Do what? Sophia's voice was silk over steel. Tell the truth. Annie deserves to know who she's really marrying, doesn't she? Annie's hands were shaking now. Someone tell me what's going on. Right now. Sophia pulled out her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen with the efficiency of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. Tyler's parents, James and Sarah Mitchell, died in a car accident 3 months ago. But what Annie doesn't know is why they were driving on Highway 47 at midnight in a thunderstorm. Sophia, stop, Nathaniel pleaded, but there was no force behind it. He looked like a man watching his execution. They were driving home from a meeting, Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength as she sensed victory. A meeting with lawyers about a lawsuit they were filing against Brook Tech Industries. The words hit Annie like physical blows. She turned to Nathaniel, searching his face for denial, for explanation, for anything that would make this make sense. Tell me that's not true. Nathaniel's silence was deafening. You see, Sophia said, warming to her theme. James Mitchell was a whistleblower. He'd worked for one of Nathaniel's subsidiary companies and discovered that they were dumping toxic waste into groundwater near low-income housing developments. When he tried to report it internally, he was fired. So he decided to go public. Annie felt the room spinning around her. Nathaniel, tell me she's lying. The lawsuit was for $200 million, Sophia continued relentlessly. It would have destroyed Nathaniel's environmental reputation and cost his company billions in cleanup and damages. James and Sarah were on their way home from meeting with investigative journalists when their car went off the road. That's enough. Nathaniel's voice cracked like a whip, but it was too late. The damage was spreading through Annie like poison. Is that why Tyler was living in poverty? Annie's voice was barely a whisper. Because his parents died fighting your company. Nathaniel finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her stomach drop. Guilt. Shame. And underneath it all, a desperate love that now felt like manipulation. Annie, it's not what you think. It's not. Her voice was rising now, hysteria creeping in around the edges. Then explain it to me, Nathaniel. Explain why you never mentioned that Tyler's parents died because of something your company did. Explain why you were so desperate to help him. Explain why you were so emotional about his success. Because I was trying to make it right. The words exploded from Nathaniel with the force of months of suppressed guilt. Because James Mitchell was right, and I didn't know about the dumping until after he was fired, and by then it was too late to save his job. Because when I tried to reach out to apologize and offer him his position back, my lawyers told me it would be an admission of guilt. Because I've been living with the knowledge that 2 good people died fighting a battle they should never have had to fight. The confession hung in the air like smoke, and Annie felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. So Tyler was what? Your guilt project? No. Nathaniel stepped toward her, but Annie stepped back. Tyler is my nephew. My sister adopted him when his grandparents couldn't take him. But yes, I felt responsible. I felt like I owed him something I could never give back. And me? Annie's voice was barely audible. What was I? Another way to ease your conscience. The question hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Annie, no. God, no. You were the person who gave him hope again. You were the person who saw his potential when he couldn't see it himself. You saved him. I saved him. Annie laughed, and the sound was bitter as glass. I saved him for you, Nathaniel. I helped your company's victim succeed so you could feel better about destroying his family. That's not how it happened. Isn't it? Annie pulled the engagement ring off her finger, the diamond catching the light one last time. How long have you known who I was? How long have you been planning this? Annie, please. How long? Nathaniel flinched. I knew who you were before I hired you. I researched every tutor in the city. I chose you because you had the highest success rate, because you specialized in gifted kids with trauma, because you were the best. Because I was convenient, Annie corrected, her voice deadly quiet. Because I was the perfect solution to your guilt problem. Hire the bleeding heart tutor who would pour her heart and soul into saving your victim's orphaned nephew. What a neat little package. It wasn't like that. When did you start planning to propose? After the first session when you saw how much I cared? After the second month when you realized I was falling for you? Or was it always the plan? Marry the tutor, make it all one big happy family, and maybe the guilt would finally go away. Each word was a blade, and Annie watched Nathaniel bleed under her assault. Part of her wanted to stop, wanted to listen to his explanations, wanted to believe that what they'd built was real. But the larger part, the part that had been conditioned by 28 years of her family's manipulation, was already constructing walls. The worst part, Annie continued, her voice breaking, is that I actually thought you loved me. I thought someone finally saw me as more than just the consolation prize, the backup plan, the girl who fixes other people's problems. But that's exactly what I was to you, wasn't it? A problem solver. Someone to clean up your mess and make you feel like a good person again. Annie, I do love you. I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Built on a lie. The words tore from her throat. Everything we shared, every moment, every conversation about Tyler, it was all built on something you were hiding from me. You let me fall in love with you while you were using me to absolve yourself of guilt over a family's death. For the first time in her life, Annie Huang understood that some cages were built by the people who claimed to surround them. The wedding reception had become a backdrop to her humiliation. 200 people watching the girl who'd always been second best discover that even her greatest triumph was founded on deception. I wanted to tell you, Nathaniel said desperately. 1,000 times, I wanted to tell you the truth. But I was afraid you'd react exactly like this. I was afraid you'd think our relationship wasn't real. It isn't real. Annie threw the ring at his feet, where it clattered across the marble floor like a fallen star. It was never real. It was just another way for me to be useful to someone else. Another way for me to pour my heart into saving someone while ignoring my own needs. She turned to face her family, seeing their faces clearly for the first time all evening. Her mother's satisfied smirk. Her father's calculating expression. Sophia's triumphant glow. They'd orchestrated this destruction with surgical precision, and she'd walked right into it. You knew, she said to Sophia. You knew all of this before tonight. I did my research the moment he walked in, Sophia admitted without shame. It took me 15 minutes to find the connection between Nathaniel Brooks and Tyler Mitchell. The internet is a wonderful thing. And you waited. You waited until I said yes, until I was happiest, to destroy it. I saved you from making the biggest mistake of your life, Sophia said coolly. Can you imagine what people would say when they found out? Poor Annie, so desperate for love that she married a man who was using her to ease his guilty conscience over killing someone's parents. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Annie looked around the room at her family, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, and realized that they'd just handed her the most devastating betrayal of her life wrapped in the bow of their concern. You're right, Annie said quietly, and for a moment, hope flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. Annie. No, Sophia's right. I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. Annie's voice grew stronger, clearer. I was about to marry someone who lied to me for 6 months. Someone who built our entire relationship on deception and manipulation. Nathaniel looked like she'd driven a knife into his chest. Annie, please. Let me explain. Let me tell you the whole truth. The truth. Annie laughed, and it was the most broken sound she'd ever made. The truth is that I'm exactly what my family has always said I am. I'm naive. I'm gullible. I'm the girl who falls for lies because she's so desperate to believe that someone could actually love her. That's not true. It is true. Annie's voice was barely a whisper now. Tyler's getting death threats because people found out about the connection, didn't they? That's why he's missing. Because even saving him has put him in danger. Nathaniel's silence was confirmation enough. Get out, Annie said quietly. Annie! Get out! The scream tore from her throat, raw and primal. Get out of here before I do something we'll both regret. Go find Tyler. Make sure he's safe. But don't you dare come back and pretend this was love when it was just a very expensive form of therapy. Nathaniel looked like he wanted to fight, to argue, to force her to listen. Instead, he bent and picked up the ring, holding it like it contained the shattered pieces of both their hearts. I do love you, he said quietly. Whether you believe it or not, I do love you. And when you're ready to hear the whole truth, not just the parts that confirm your worst fears about yourself, I'll be waiting. He walked away, his shoulders straight and proud despite the devastation, and Annie watched him go with the terrible knowledge that she'd just destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her. But the worst part wasn't losing Nathaniel. The worst part was the look of satisfied triumph on her family's faces, and the dawning realization that she'd just given them exactly what they'd always wanted. She was alone again. She was less than again. She was exactly where they needed her to be to maintain their carefully constructed hierarchy. NF love you most. The silence after Nathaniel's departure was deafening. Annie stood in the center of the reception hall, surrounded by 200 faces that ranged from shocked to pitying to openly curious, and felt herself fragmenting into pieces too small to ever put back together. Oh, sweetheart. Her mother's voice was honey over poison as warm arms wrapped around Annie's shoulders. I know this hurts now, but you'll thank us later. We saved you from a terrible mistake. Annie wanted to shrug off the embrace, to scream that her mother had saved her from nothing except happiness. Instead, she found herself leaning into the familiar comfort, hating herself for needing it even as it suffocated her. Come on, Dad said gently, his hand on her back. Let's get you home. You don't need to be here for this. Asterisk this. Asterisk as if her heartbreak was just an inconvenient interruption to Sophia's perfect day. Annie looked around the reception hall, seeing it clearly for the first time. The whispered conversations, the phones being lifted to capture her humiliation, the satisfied smirks of relatives who'd just witnessed the family hierarchy restore itself. No, Annie said quietly, stepping away from her parents. I'm not leaving. Annie, dear, you're clearly upset, Aunt Margaret began. I'm not upset. Annie's voice was growing stronger, fueled by something dark and reckless. I'm enlightened. For the first time in my life, I can see exactly what you all are. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sophia appeared at Annie's side, her wedding dress rustling like danger. Annie, you're making a scene, she hissed. People are recording this. Good. Annie turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying across the marble floor. Let them record it. Let everyone see what the Huang family really is. Honey, you're in shock, her mother said urgently. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in 28 years. Annie's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Did you know that Nathaniel was telling the truth about my business revenue? $2 million in 3 years. Did you know I turned down Harvard to stay close to home? Did you know that I've been featured in Educational Weekly 3 times for my innovative teaching methods? She could see the discomfort spreading across familiar faces, the shift from satisfaction to unease as she continued. But none of that matters, does it? Because the only thing that matters in this family is keeping me in my place. Making sure I never forget that I'm the spare twin, the disappointment, the one who needs to be saved from her own poor judgment. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Annie's voice was rising now, hysteria bleeding through her control. You just destroyed the first real relationship I've ever had. You took my happiness and ripped it apart in front of 200 people, and you did it because you couldn't stand the idea that I might actually be worth loving. Her phone buzzed insistently in her purse. Then again, and again. Annie pulled it out, expecting more social media notifications about her viral humiliation. Instead, she found a string of texts from a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk this is Tyler. I know what happened tonight. I saw the videos. Asterisk. Asterisk I need to talk to you. About Nathaniel. About my parents. About everything. Asterisk. Asterisk I'm safe, but I'm not coming back until this is fixed. Asterisk. Asterisk meet me tomorrow. Pier 47, noon. Come alone. Asterisk. Asterisk please. There are things you need to know. Asterisk. Annie's hands started shaking as she read the messages. Tyler was safe, but he was also clearly aware of the disaster that had unfolded. Another life disrupted by her family's need to destroy anything good in her world. Who's texting you? Sophia's voice was sharp with suspicion. No one, Annie lied, shoving the phone back into her purse. But the damage was done. She could see the calculation in her sister's eyes, the predatory attention that meant Sophia sensed another opportunity to strike. Annie. Grandma Rose appeared at her elbow, her voice gentle but urgent. We need to talk. Privately. No more private conversations. No more family meetings where you all decide what's best for me. Annie's voice was breaking now, exhaustion replacing the adrenaline-fueled anger. I'm done. You're not done, Sophia said coolly. You're having a tantrum because for once, someone called you out on your self-destructive behavior. Nathaniel Brooks used you, Annie. He built your entire relationship on a lie, and instead of being grateful that we exposed it, you're lashing out at the people who love you most. The words hit their target with surgical precision. Annie felt her knees weaken as doubt crashed over her again. Asterisk, what if they are right? What if I am just being naive and self-destructive? What if Nathaniel really was just using me? Asterisk. That's right, sweetheart, her mother said, sensing weakness. You're hurt and confused right now. But in a few days, when the shock wears off, you'll see that we did the right thing. Will I? Annie's voice was barely a whisper. Or will I see that you destroyed the only person who ever made me feel like I was enough? Annie. Sophia's voice was infinitely patient, the tone she used with particularly slow children. Look at this objectively. A billionaire you've been dating for 6 months proposes to you at my wedding, knowing it will create a media circus. His business is in trouble, he's facing scandal, and suddenly he needs a heartwarming story about helping orphans and marrying the noble tutor. Does that really sound like love to you? Each word was a nail in the coffin of Annie's hope. Because when Sophia laid it out like that, it did sound calculated. It did sound like the kind of strategic move a desperate businessman might make. And Tyler, Sophia continued relentlessly, the traumatized teenager who needed saving. How convenient that Nathaniel found the perfect bleeding heart to pour her maternal instincts into helping his guilt project. You fell for it completely, didn't you? The wounded boy, the guilty billionaire, the chance to be the hero who saves them both. Stop, Annie whispered, but Sophia was just getting started. He probably has a team of investigators who told him exactly what kind of woman you are. Loyal to a fault. Self-sacrificing. So desperate to be needed that you'll ignore red flags if someone makes you feel important enough. Annie closed her eyes, but she couldn't shut out the voice that was systematically destroying every beautiful memory she'd built with Nathaniel. The late nights planning Tyler's application essays. The quiet dinners where Nathaniel listened to her dreams with rapt attention. The morning he'd brought her coffee and stayed to help grade papers, claiming he wanted to understand her work better. Asterisk, had it all been performance? Had every moment of connection been carefully calculated to keep her invested in Tyler's success? Asterisk. I need to go home, Annie said quietly. Of course you do, her mother agreed quickly. Dad and I will drive you. No. Annie's voice was flat, emotionless. I need to be alone. She started toward the exit, but Sophia's voice stopped her cold. Annie, wait. There's something else. Annie turned slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. What now? Sophia held up her phone, and Annie could see a news article loaded on the screen. It's about Nathaniel's business troubles. The ones that started before he met you. Annie's heart sank as she realized what was coming next. The timeline doesn't match what he told you, Sophia said with false gentleness. The investigation into Brook Tech's environmental violations began 8 months ago. The lawsuit was filed 6 months ago. Nathaniel hired you 5 months ago. The numbers hit Annie like physical blows. What are you saying? I'm saying he knew about the lawsuit when he hired you. He knew Tyler's parents were dead because of his company when he brought you in to help their son. This wasn't guilt after the fact, Annie. This was damage control from day one. Annie felt the world tilt sideways. If Sophia was right, and Annie couldn't bring herself to doubt the timeline when it was laid out so starkly, then Nathaniel had been lying to her from the very first moment they met. The proposal tonight, Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger as she sensed victory. It wasn't about love. It was about optics. Marry the tutor who saved Tyler, Show the world that he's a man who takes care of his responsibilities, and maybe the public will forgive him for the dead whistleblowers. You're lying, Annie whispered, but even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. Am I? Sophia showed her the phone screen. Check the dates yourself. Annie stared at the article, her vision blurring as the timeline became undeniable. 6 months ago, Tyler's parents died in that car crash. 5 months ago, Nathaniel walked into her tutoring center, desperate and soaking wet. 4 months ago, he started staying late after Tyler's sessions, charming her with questions about her methods and her dreams. Asterisk, how long have you been planning this? Asterisk. The question she'd hurled at him earlier echoed in her mind, and now she wondered if the answer was worse than she'd imagined. I have to go, Annie said, backing toward the exit. Annie, sweetheart, don't drive. You're upset, her father called after her. But Annie was already running, her heels clicking against the marble as she fled the reception hall. She could hear voices calling her name, could feel the weight of 200 stairs following her retreat, but she didn't care. She made it to her car before the tears came, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. In the space of 2 hours, she'd gone from engaged to the love of her life to completely alone, questioning every moment of happiness she'd experienced in the past 6 months. Her phone buzzed with another text from Tyler, asterisk please. I know you probably hate us both right now, but there are things my family never told anyone. Things that change everything. Asterisk. Annie stared at the message, torn between the desperate hope that Tyler could somehow explain away the damning timeline and the growing certainty that she was just setting herself up for more heartbreak. She was about to delete the message when another text appeared. Asterisk, my parents weren't whistleblowers, Annie. They were trying to cover up the dumping. Nathaniel didn't kill them. He was trying to stop them. Asterisk. Annie's hands started shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Asterisk, everything you think you know is backwards. Meet me tomorrow. Please. Asterisk. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor of her car. Annie sat in the parking lot of her sister's wedding reception, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, and realized that she might have just made the biggest mistake of her existence. But the worst part was that she had no idea anymore what the truth actually was. And the one person who might be able to tell her was a traumatized teenager who was hiding God knows where, carrying secrets that could either redeem or damn the man she'd just sent away forever. In the distance, she could see her family emerging from the reception hall, their faces etched with concern that looked genuine from a distance but felt like performance art up close. They were coming to comfort her. They were coming to make sure their victory was complete. And Annie realized with crystal clarity that she had nowhere left to run. Annie spent the night staring at her ceiling, Tyler's text messages burning holes in her phone screen. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathaniel's face when she'd thrown the ring at his feet. The devastation there had looked so real, so raw. But then she'd remember Sophia's timeline, the damning evidence of calculated deception, and the spiral would begin again. Asterisk, my parents weren't whistleblowers. They were trying to cover up the dumping. Asterisk. The words made no sense. Everything she'd read, everything Sophia had shown her, painted James and Sarah Mitchell as heroes fighting corporate corruption. How could Tyler's version be so completely different? By dawn, Annie had made her decision. She would meet Tyler at Pier 47, but not because she hoped for redemption. She would meet him to get closure, to hear whatever final manipulation Nathaniel had coached the boy to deliver, and then she would move forward with her life. Asterisk, without Nathaniel. Without the fairy tale. Without the delusion that someone like him could truly love someone like her. Asterisk. The thought felt like swallowing glass, but it also felt like accepting reality. At 11:30 a.m., Annie parked near the pier and walked toward the water, her hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets against the November cold. The harbor was mostly empty, just a few joggers and early dog walkers. She spotted Tyler sitting on a bench at the far end of the pier, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked older than his 15 years, worn down by grief and whatever chaos had erupted after the viral proposal. When he saw her approaching, he stood up, his face a mask of nervous determination. Annie. His voice cracked slightly. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Annie remained standing, keeping distance between them. Tyler, whatever Nathaniel told you to say to me. Nathaniel doesn't know I'm here. Tyler's interruption was sharp, desperate. He doesn't know I contacted you. He thinks I'm at my friend Jake's house, hiding from the media circus. That gave Annie pause. If Nathaniel wasn't orchestrating this meeting, then why? Tyler, I've seen the timeline. I know about your parents' lawsuit against Nathaniel's company. I know they died fighting corporate corruption, and I know Nathaniel has been using both of us to ease his guilty conscience. Tyler's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, something that looked like anger. Who told you that? It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that it's true. It's not true. Tyler's voice was gaining strength. Annie, whoever gave you that information is lying to you. My parents weren't whistleblowers. They weren't heroes fighting corruption. Tyler pulled out his phone and started scrolling through photos. Look at this. Really look. He showed her a picture of a beautiful house with an enormous pool and a 3-car garage. This was our house 2 years ago. We lived in Millbrook Estates. Do you know what houses cost in Millbrook Estates? Annie studied the photo, confusion growing. Tyler, this looks like we were wealthy. We were. My dad wasn't some noble employee standing up to corporate evil. He was a department head making $300,000 a year. He was part of the cover-up, not fighting against it. The words hit Annie like physical blows. Tyler continued scrolling, showing her more photos, expensive cars, luxury vacations, private school uniforms. My mom didn't work, Tyler said, his voice growing bitter. She spent her days at charity luncheons and spa appointments, paid for by money my dad earned keeping his mouth shut about what his department was dumping into those groundwater systems. Annie sank onto the bench, her legs suddenly unable to support her. That can't be right. The lawsuit was filed after Nathaniel fired my dad and froze his pension. Tyler sat beside her, his phone still open to the damning photos. Dad panicked when he realized he was going to lose everything. That's when he suddenly developed a conscience about the environmental damage. But the news reports were spun by my parents' lawyer to make them look sympathetic. Tyler's laugh was harsh. Dead whistleblowers make better headlines than corrupt executive dies while fleeing justice. Annie felt the world shifting beneath her feet again. Tyler, why are you telling me this? Because Nathaniel has been destroying himself with guilt over something that wasn't his fault. Tyler turned to face her fully. Annie, do you know why he hired you? To help his guilt project. To fix the damage his company caused. No. Tyler's voice was gentle but firm. He hired you because I was failing out of school. Because I was angry and depressed and making everyone around me miserable. Because my aunt, Nathaniel's sister, was crying herself to sleep every night wondering how to help me. Annie stared at him, seeing the teenager clearly for the first time. Not the tragic orphan she'd been tutoring, but a real kid with complex emotions and a complicated history. Nathaniel researched every tutor in the city, Tyler continued. He didn't choose you because you were convenient. He chose you because you had a reputation for reaching kids like me. Kids who'd given up on themselves. Kids like you. Angry kids. Privileged kids who'd lost everything. Kids who blamed everyone else for their problems. Tyler's voice cracked. Annie, I hated Nathaniel when I first moved in with him. I blamed him for my parents' deaths, even though I knew deep down they'd brought it on themselves. I was awful to him. I broke things in his house. I screamed at him. I told him I wished he'd died instead of them. Annie felt tears pricking her eyes as she imagined Nathaniel dealing with a grieving, furious teenager while carrying his own burden of misplaced guilt. But he never gave up on me, Tyler said. Even when I was at my worst, he kept believing I could be better. And then he brought you into our lives, and for the first time since my parents died, someone looked at me and saw potential instead of problems. Tyler, I know what my family was, Annie. I know my parents were corrupt and selfish and that they probably deserved what happened to them. But Nathaniel has been carrying their sins like they were his own, and it's killing him. Tyler showed her another photo, Nathaniel and Tyler together at what looked like a baseball game. Nathaniel was smiling, but even in the photo, Annie could see the shadows in his eyes. He loves you, Tyler said quietly. Not because you fixed his guilt or solved his problems. He loves you because you saved me without knowing you were saving me. You looked at a spoiled, angry kid and somehow saw someone worth fighting for. Annie's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back since the previous night. Tyler, even if that's true, he still lied to me. He built our relationship on deception. Did he? Tyler's question was gentle but challenging. Annie, what did Nathaniel tell you about how we met? He said you were his nephew, that you'd had some challenges, that you needed help with college applications. All true. But he made it sound like you were just a normal kid dealing with normal problems. I was a kid dealing with problems. The fact that those problems included dead parents and family corruption doesn't change the fact that I needed help. Tyler paused. Annie, did Nathaniel ever lie to you directly? Annie thought back through their conversations, searching for outright deceptions. He said he felt responsible for your situation. He does feel responsible. He thinks if he'd discovered the cover-up sooner, he could have stopped it before my parents were in too deep. He said your parents were good people. He was trying to protect me from the truth about what they really were. Tyler's voice was thick with emotion. Annie, do you have any idea what it's like to find out your parents were criminals? To realize that everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie? The question hit too close to home. Annie thought about her own family's performance the night before, the calculated cruelty disguised as concern. Nathaniel has been protecting me from that knowledge for months, Tyler continued. He's been letting me think of my parents as flawed but fundamentally good people instead of the selfish criminals they actually were. Is that really so terrible? Annie wiped her eyes, feeling the careful walls she'd built around her anger starting to crumble. Tyler, why didn't he tell me the truth? Because he was afraid you'd think exactly what you thought last night. That he was using you to ease his guilt. Tyler's smile was sad but knowing. Annie, you've spent our entire tutoring relationship trying to save me. Did it ever occur to you that maybe I was trying to save you too? Save me from what? From believing you're not worth loving unless you're useful to someone. Tyler's words were gentle but devastating. Annie, I've watched you for months. I've seen how you light up when you help people, but I've also seen how you disappear when you think you're not needed. Annie felt exposed, seen in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. Nathaniel sees it too, Tyler said quietly. That's why he was so afraid to tell you about my parents. He knew you'd find a way to make it about your own inadequacy instead of seeing it for what it really was. Which was what? Love. Tyler's voice was matter-of-fact. Plain and simple love. Nathaniel fell in love with you because of who you are, not because of what you could do for him. But your family spent last night convincing you that love like that doesn't exist for people like you. The words hit their target with painful accuracy. Annie thought about Sophia's systematic destruction of her happiness, her parents' careful reinforcement of her insecurities, the family's collective need to keep her in her place. They are wrong, you know, Tyler said. Your family. They are wrong about you, and they are wrong about Nathaniel. Annie's phone buzzed. A text from her mother. * sweetheart, we're worried about you. Come home and let us take care of you. *. She stared at the message, seeing it clearly for the first time. Not an offer of comfort, but a summons back to captivity. Tyler, Annie said slowly, there's something I need to ask you. Anything. When Nathaniel proposed last night, was he planning it? Was it calculated for maximum impact? Tyler was quiet for a long moment. He'd been carrying that ring for 2 months, waiting for the right moment. He was going to propose on Thanksgiving, somewhere private where you could think it through without pressure. Then why? Because he got a call yesterday morning. Someone had leaked information about my parents to the press. Not the truth, but the sanitized version that makes them look like heroes. Nathaniel knew it was only a matter of time before people connected the dots between him and me and you. Annie felt pieces clicking into place. He was trying to get ahead of the story. He was trying to protect you from finding out the way you did last night. He thought if he proposed publicly, if he claimed you officially, then when the truth came out, people would see it as a love story instead of a scandal. But it backfired. Your family made sure it backfired. Tyler's voice was hard. Annie, who do you think leaked the story in the first place? The question hit Annie like a lightning bolt. She thought about her father's secretive phone calls, Sophia's too convenient research, the perfectly timed revelation that had maximum destructive impact. They knew, she whispered. They've known for weeks. They've been waiting for the perfect moment to use it against you. Annie felt something break open in her chest, not her heart this time, but the chains that had kept her bound to her family's version of reality. Tyler, she said, her voice growing stronger, I need to ask you something else. If Nathaniel and I, if we tried to work this out, would you be okay with that? Given everything that's happened. Tyler's smile was the first genuinely happy expression she'd seen from him in months. Annie, Nathaniel has been miserable for 12 hours. He's been pacing around the house like a caged animal, muttering about finding a way to prove he loves you that doesn't involve money or grand gestures. Where is he now? Probably at his office, trying to work himself to death so he doesn't have to think about losing you. Annie stood up, decision crystallizing in her chest like resolve made solid. Tyler, I need you to call him. What should I tell him? Tell him. Annie paused, thinking. Tell him that his fiancée is on her way to his office, and she has some things she needs to say to him. Your family isn't going to like this, Tyler warned. Annie thought about Sophia's triumphant face, her parents' satisfied manipulation, the 28 years of being told she wasn't enough. Good, she said, and meant it. For the first time in her life, Annie Huang was about to choose herself over her family's version of who she should be. It was terrifying. It was necessary, and it was long overdue. The Brook Tech Industries building rose 43 stories into the Seattle sky, all glass and steel and intimidating corporate power. Annie stood in the lobby, her hands shaking as she announced herself to the security desk. I'm here to see Nathaniel Brooks. Tell him Annie Huang is here. The security guard's eyebrows rose. Mr. Brook is in meetings all afternoon. Tell him Annie Huang is here, she repeated, her voice gaining strength. He'll see me. 5 minutes later, she was riding the elevator to the executive floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Tyler had texted that Nathaniel was expecting her, but expecting her and wanting to see her might be two very different things. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that screamed understated wealth, the kind of space designed to make visitors feel both impressed and insignificant. But Annie wasn't a visitor anymore. She was a woman who'd finally learned the difference between being useful and being valued. Ms. Huang. A polished assistant appeared at her side. Mr. Brook is waiting for you in his office. Annie followed her down a hallway lined with awards and accolades, each one a testament to Nathaniel's business acumen. She'd never seen this side of his life, the empire he'd built, the power he wielded. For a moment, her old insecurities threatened to surface. Asterisk, what am I doing here? I don't belong in this world. Asterisk. But then she remembered Tyler's words. Asterisk, he loves you because of who you are, not because of what you could do for him. Asterisk. The assistant knocked on a heavy wooden door, then pushed it open. Ms. Huang to see you, sir. Nathaniel stood behind his desk, and Annie's breath caught at the sight of him. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept any more than she had. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie loosened, his expensive suit wrinkled. But when he saw her, hope blazed in his eyes so brightly it was almost painful to witness. Annie. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Nathaniel. She stayed by the door, needing the distance for what she had to say. I talked to Tyler. Nathaniel's face went carefully neutral. I see. He told me about his parents. The real story. Annie. Let me finish. She stepped further into the office, noting the way Nathaniel tracked her movement like she was something precious and fragile. Tyler told me that you've been carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry. That you've been protecting him from truths he needed to face. That you hired me because you thought I could help him, not because you were trying to manipulate me. Nathaniel sat down heavily in his chair, as if his legs could no longer support him. Tyler shouldn't have. Tyler should have told me months ago. Annie's voice was stronger now, fueled by growing certainty. But I understand why he didn't. And I understand why you didn't. She moved closer to his desk, seeing the papers scattered across its surface, financial reports, legal documents, what looked like investigative records. Nathaniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Anything. Did you know who I was before you hired me? I mean, did you know I was Sophia's twin sister? Nathaniel went very still. Yes. The admission should have hurt, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. How long have you known my family? Annie, I don't think. How long, Nathaniel? Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly older than his 32 years. 3 years. Annie felt something cold settle in her stomach. 3 years. But that's impossible. I would have remembered meeting you. You never met me. Nathaniel's voice was carefully controlled. But I met your sister. And your parents. And your Uncle Richard. The world tilted sideways. What are you talking about? Nathaniel stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. Annie, there's something I need to show you. Something I've been investigating for months. He opened the folder on his desk, revealing photographs, documents, printed emails. Annie approached slowly, dread building in her chest. 3 years ago, Nathaniel said quietly, Sophia applied for a job at Brook Tech Marketing Director position. She was qualified, impressive interview, solid references. Annie stared at a professional headshot of her sister, clipped to what looked like a job application. She never told me she applied to work for you. Because she didn't get the job. Nathaniel pulled out another document. We offered it to someone else. Someone with more experience. Okay, but I don't understand why. Look at the date, Annie. She looked. The rejection letter was dated 2 weeks before Annie's biggest client, Harrison Academy, suddenly terminated her contract without explanation. That's a coincidence, Annie said, but her voice lacked conviction. Nathaniel pulled out more papers. Harrison Academy terminated your contract after receiving an anonymous tip that you were inflating your success rates. The tip included fabricated evidence of grade manipulation. Annie's hands started shaking. That's impossible. I never manipulated grades. Harrison Academy investigated and found. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But the investigation took 6 weeks, during which time you lost 3 other clients who didn't want to be associated with the scandal. The memory came flooding back, the worst 6 weeks of her professional life, when everything she'd built seemed to be crumbling around her. She'd never understood where the accusations had come from. Nathaniel, why are you showing me this? He pulled out another set of documents. Because 2 weeks after Harrison Academy reinstated your contract, Sophia applied for another job. This time at Henderson Marketing, one of our competitors. Did she get it? She did. And 3 months later, you lost another major client. Wellington Prep. Same pattern, anonymous tip, false accusations, lengthy investigation that cleared you but damaged your reputation. Annie sank into a chair, the implications hitting her like physical blows. You're saying Sophia has been sabotaging my business. I'm saying someone has been systematically targeting your client base for 3 years. Every time you gained momentum, every time you were on the verge of a major breakthrough, something happened to knock you back down. Nathaniel pulled out more evidence, a pattern of attacks that coincided perfectly with key moments in Sophia's career advancement. Each time Annie was hurt professionally, Sophia seemed to benefit somehow. But why? Annie's voice was barely a whisper. Why would she do this to me? Because she needed you to stay small. Nathaniel's voice was gentle but relentless. Because her entire identity is built on being the successful twin. If you ever reached your full potential, if you ever got the recognition you deserved, what would that make her? Annie thought about the previous night, about Sophia's systematic destruction of her happiness, about the way her family had closed ranks to ensure Annie stayed in her designated role. How long have you known? She asked. I suspected something when Tyler mentioned your name during one of our early sessions. He'd looked you up online after I hired you, and he mentioned that you looked exactly like someone I'd interviewed years before. When I realized the connection, I started investigating. That's why you hired me. Not because I was the best tutor, but because you suspected my family was sabotaging me. No. Nathaniel's voice was firm. I hired you because you were the best tutor. The investigation came later, after I started falling in love with you and couldn't understand why someone so talented was struggling professionally. Annie stared at the evidence scattered across his desk. 3 years of systematic sabotage disguised as bad luck. Nathaniel, do you have proof? Actual proof that connects this to Sophia? Nathaniel hesitated. Some. Enough to raise serious questions. But not enough to take to court. What kind of proof? IP addresses traced to devices in your parents' house. Financial records showing payments to a private investigator who specializes in corporate espionage. Email communications between your Uncle Richard and the lawyer who filed the Harrison Academy complaint. The room seemed to spin around Annie as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Her family hadn't just been passively keeping her down, they'd been actively destroying her chances at success for years. Annie, Nathaniel said gently, there's more. More. He pulled out a final document, a contract with letterhead she recognized. Do you remember the Pemberton Foundation? The educational grant you applied for 2 years ago. Annie's heart stopped. The Pemberton Foundation grant would have allowed her to expand her business nationally, to help hundreds more students. She'd made it to the final round before being mysteriously disqualified. You won that grant, Nathaniel said quietly. You were the unanimous choice of the selection committee. That's impossible. They said I was disqualified for allegedly falsifying recommendation letters. Letters that were proven to be authentic 3 weeks after the grant was awarded to someone else. Annie felt like she was falling through space. How do you know this? Because I serve on the Pemberton Foundation board. I was the one who cast the deciding vote in your favor. Nathaniel's voice was thick with emotion. And I was the one who fought to have you reinstated when the truth came out. But by then, The money had already been allocated. You knew who I was 2 years ago. I knew your work. I knew your reputation. I knew you deserved that grant more than anyone else who applied. Annie looked up at him, seeing something new in his expression. Nathaniel, when exactly did you start investigating my family? The day Tyler mentioned your name, and I realized Sophia Huang's twin sister was the same Annie Huang whose career I'd been watching with admiration for 2 years. The admission hit Annie like lightning. You'd been watching my career. Annie, you're brilliant. Your methods are revolutionary. Your success rates are unprecedented. I've been hoping for years that you'd apply to work with our corporate education initiatives. But I never. Annie stopped, remembering. I did apply. Last year. I submitted a proposal for a partnership with Brook Tech's community outreach program. A proposal that never reached my desk, Nathaniel said grimly. A proposal that was mysteriously lost in our internal mail system. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture so devastating Annie could barely process it. Her family hadn't just been undermining her confidence, they'd been actively sabotaging her professional opportunities for years. Annie, Nathaniel said softly, I need you to understand something. Everything between us, every conversation, every moment, every feeling, that was real. The investigation into your family was separate. I fell in love with you completely independent of anything I knew about their sabotage. Annie stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, her family was probably planning their next move, their next way to ensure she stayed broken and dependent. They knew, she said quietly. Last night, when you proposed, they already knew about Tyler's parents. They had the timeline ready, the accusations prepared. They weren't protecting me from making a mistake. They were protecting themselves from losing control. Annie. She turned to face him, and Nathaniel saw something new in her expression. Not the broken woman who'd thrown his ring at his feet, but someone harder, stronger, forged in the fire of absolute clarity. I want copies of everything, she said. Every document, every piece of evidence, every proof of what they've done. What are you planning to do? Annie's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm going to give my family a choice. They can back off and let me live my life, or I can make their sabotage public and let them explain to their social circle why they've spent 3 years trying to destroy their own daughter. Nathaniel stepped closer to her. Annie, are you sure? Once you take this step, there's no going back. I'm sure. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the expensive suit and corporate power to the man who'd spent 2 years admiring her work from afar. The man who'd fallen in love with her mind before he'd ever seen her face. The man who'd been investigating her family not to use the information against her, but to protect her from their continued attacks. Nathaniel, I have something I need to say to you. Anything. I'm sorry. The words came from the deepest part of her soul. I'm sorry I believed them instead of trusting what I knew about you. I'm sorry I let 28 years of conditioning override 6 months of evidence. I'm sorry I threw your ring away instead of fighting for us. Nathaniel crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. Annie, you have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. What they did to you, what they've been doing to you, it's not your fault. I love you, she whispered against his chest. I love you so much it terrifies me. And I'm tired of being afraid of good things. I love you too. His voice was rough with emotion. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce heart and your absolute determination to save everyone except yourself. Annie pulled back to look at him. What if I told you I'm done trying to save everyone else? What if I told you I'm ready to fight for myself for once? Nathaniel's smile was radiant. I'd say it's about time. And I'd say that anyone who tries to stop you is going to have to go through me first. Annie stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring 3 years of suppressed potential and 6 months of real love and 1 night of absolute clarity into the connection between them. When they broke apart, Nathaniel pulled the engagement ring from his pocket. He'd been carrying it since the previous night, unable to give up hope. Annie Huang, he said, going down on one knee right there in his office. Will you marry me? Not for publicity, not for redemption, not for any reason except that I love you and want to spend the rest of my life proving you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. Yes, Annie said, and this time the word rang with absolute certainty. But first, we have a family to deal with. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger, where it belonged. Together. Together. And for the first time in her life, Annie Huang felt like she had someone truly on her side. The war with her family was about to begin. But she was no longer fighting it alone. The Huang family Sunday dinner had been a sacred tradition for 28 years. Every week, without fail, the extended family gathered at Annie's parents' house for her mother's famous roast and a carefully orchestrated performance of familial harmony. Annie had missed exactly 3 dinners in her entire adult life, once for food poisoning, once for a college interview, and once when she'd been in the hospital with appendicitis. Today would be the 4th. But she wasn't missing it. She was arriving on her own terms. Annie parked across the street from her childhood home, Nathaniel beside her in the passenger seat. In the back seat, Tyler sat quietly, having insisted on being part of whatever was about to unfold. "You sure about this?" Nathaniel asked for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "I'm sure." Annie looked at the house where she'd spent her childhood learning to make herself smaller, and felt nothing but calm certainty. They need to understand that their power over me is over. The folder of evidence sat in her lap, 3 years of systematic sabotage documented in excruciating detail. Nathaniel's investigators had worked through the weekend, and the picture they'd assembled was even worse than either of them had imagined. Not only had Sophia been orchestrating attacks on Annie's business, but Uncle Richard had been using his legal connections to blacklist her from certain opportunities. Aunt Margaret had been spreading rumors at her country club about Annie's questionable business practices. Even her parents had been complicit, feeding information about Annie's plans and dreams to Sophia so she could stay one step ahead. "They turned destroying me into a family project," Annie had said when Nathaniel showed her the final report. The words should have hurt, but instead they'd felt like liberation. Finally, she could stop blaming herself for every professional setback, every missed opportunity, every moment when she'd felt like she was sabotaging her own success. Now, walking up the front steps with Nathaniel and Tyler flanking her, Annie felt the weight of 28 years of conditioning trying to settle back on her shoulders. The old Annie would have knocked quietly, would have apologized for bringing uninvited guests, would have immediately begun minimizing herself to fit back into the family dynamic. Instead, she used her key and walked straight in. "Hello, family," she called out, her voice carrying through the house with new authority. "We need to talk." The sounds of conversation from the dining room stopped abruptly. Annie could hear chairs scraping, whispered questions, the clatter of silverware being hastily set down. "Annie!" Her mother's voice was sharp with surprise and something that might have been panic. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? We didn't think you'd, after last night, we assumed." "You assumed I'd be too broken to function," Annie said, walking into the dining room with Nathaniel and Tyler behind her. "You assumed I'd go crawl into a hole somewhere and lick my wounds while you all congratulated yourselves on saving me from happiness." The assembled family, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and Sophia still in her wedding afterglow, stared at the trio in stunned silence. Annie saw the moment they recognized Nathaniel, watched calculation and confusion war across their faces. "Annie, dear," Aunt Margaret began in her most condescending tone, "I think you may be having some sort of breakdown." "I'm having a breakthrough." Annie set the evidence folder on the dining room table with deliberate precision. "Nathaniel, Tyler, and I have spent the last 2 days uncovering some fascinating information about our family." Sophia had gone white as paper. "Annie, whatever you think you've discovered." "I know exactly what I've discovered." Annie opened the folder, spreading photographs and documents across her mother's pristine tablecloth. 3 years of corporate sabotage. Systematic destruction of my professional opportunities. Coordinated attacks designed to keep me dependent on this family's approval. Dad stood up abruptly. "Annie, I don't know what kind of lies this man has been filling your head with." "Lies?" Nathaniel's voice was silk over steel. "Mr. Huang, would you like to explain these financial records showing payments to Morrison Investigations? Or perhaps you'd like to discuss the IP address logs that trace the Harrison Academy complaint back to your home computer?" The silence that followed was deafening. Annie watched her family's faces cycle through shock, denial, and finally, a cold calculation that she recognized all too well. "Even if that were true," Uncle Richard said carefully, "it would simply prove that we were looking out for your best interests. Sometimes families have to make hard choices." "Hard choices?" Annie's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You destroyed my career opportunities to look out for my best interests. We were protecting you from failure." The words exploded from Sophia with desperate intensity. "Annie, you don't understand how competitive your field is. We were saving you from heartbreak. You were saving yourselves from competition." Tyler's voice cut through the room like a blade. The 15-year-old stepped forward, his presence radiating a quiet authority that made several adults take a step back. Excuse me. Sophia's voice was ice. You heard me. Tyler pulled out his phone, displaying screenshots of social media posts. You've been monitoring Annie's professional accounts for years. Every time she posted about a success, every time she gained recognition, one of you would find a way to undermine it. He swiped through more evidence, carefully documented patterns of sabotage that painted a picture of systematic family abuse disguised as concern. But here's what's really interesting, Tyler continued, his voice gaining strength. The psychological profile our investigator put together shows classic patterns of narcissistic family dynamics. Annie was designated as the scapegoat, the family member whose failure is necessary to maintain everyone else's sense of superiority. That's ridiculous, Dad began. Is it? Nathaniel stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. Because the evidence suggests that this family has been systematically undermining Annie's success for years while simultaneously claiming to love and protect her. He pulled out another document, a financial analysis that made Annie's eyes widen. Do you know what Annie's business would be worth today if she hadn't lost those 3 major contracts? If the Pemberton grant hadn't been sabotaged? If her reputation hadn't been systematically attacked? Nathaniel, Annie began. $4.7 million. The number hit the room like a bomb. Your daughter's business should be worth $4.7 million right now. Instead, she's been struggling to pay rent because her own family has been sabotaging her success. Annie stared at the number, feeling something break open in her chest. Not heartbreak this time, but a kind of awed understanding of just how much she'd been capable of achieving. That's impossible, her mother whispered. Annie's business is small. Because you made sure it stayed small. Annie's voice filled the room with new power. Because every time I was on the verge of something big, one of you found a way to tear it down. She turned to face Sophia, seeing her twin clearly for the first time in their lives. You weren't protecting me from failure. You were protecting yourself from my success. Because if I ever reached my full potential, what would that make you? Sophia's face crumpled, and for a moment Annie saw not her tormentor but a broken woman whose entire identity was built on someone else's diminishment. Annie, you don't understand, Sophia began. I understand perfectly. Annie's voice was gentle but implacable. I understand that you've spent our entire lives needing me to be less than you. I understand that my happiness threatens your sense of self. I understand that this family has turned love into a zero-sum game where my success means your failure. She looked around the room at the faces that had shaped her understanding of her own worth for nearly 3 decades. But here's what's going to change, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm done playing that game. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger. I'm done sacrificing my dreams to preserve your egos. Annie, we're your family, her mother pleaded. You're my family, Annie agreed. And that's why I'm giving you a choice. She gestured to the evidence spread across the table. All of this stops. Now. The sabotage, the undermining, the systematic destruction of my opportunities, it ends today. You will publicly retract every false statement you've made about my business. You will make financial restitution for the opportunities you've destroyed. And you will respect my relationship with Nathaniel and my choices about my own life. And if we don't? Uncle Richard's voice was cold. Annie's smile was sharp as a blade. Then I make all of this public. I show the world exactly what the Huang family really is. I let your social circle, your business partners, your country club friends see the documentation of how you've spent years systematically abusing one of your own children. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Annie could see the calculation in their eyes, the weighing of public embarrassment against the loss of control over her. You're bluffing, Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Try me. Annie's voice was absolutely certain. I've spent 28 years being afraid of disappointing you. I'm done being afraid. She turned to Nathaniel, who was watching her with undisguised admiration. Nathaniel and I are getting married. Tyler will be our best man. You're all invited to the wedding, but your attendance is contingent on your behavior between now and then. Annie, her father began. I'm not finished. Annie's voice cut through his interruption. Tyler is also moving in with us. His education, his future, his well-being, that's our responsibility now. Not because Nathaniel feels guilty, but because Tyler deserves a family that celebrates his success instead of sabotaging it. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. Annie, you don't have to. I want to. She turned to the teenager who'd helped her find her strength. Tyler, you saved my life yesterday. You showed me the difference between people who love you and people who need you to stay broken. That makes you family in every way that matters. She looked back at her parents, her aunts and uncles, the sisterhood spent their entire lives treating her like competition. I love you all, she said quietly. But I love myself more now. And I won't sacrifice my happiness to preserve your comfort ever again. The silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice small and uncertain. What do you want from us, Annie? I want you to be happy for me. I want you to celebrate my successes instead of undermining them. I want you to treat me like a daughter you're proud of instead of a problem you need to manage. And if we can't do that, Annie's smile was sad but certain, then I'll build a family with people who can. She started gathering the evidence back into the folder, her movements deliberate and final. Nathaniel, Tyler, let's go home. As they reached the door, Grandma Rose's voice stopped them. Annie, wait. Annie turned to see her grandmother standing in the doorway, her eyes bright with tears and something that looked like pride. I owe you an apology, Rose said quietly. I knew what they were doing. Not the details, but I knew you were being treated unfairly. And I said nothing because it was easier than confronting them. The admission hung in the air like a bridge between the past and the future. I'm proud of you, Rose continued. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely proud of who you're becoming. Annie felt tears pricking her eyes. Thank you, Grandma. That means everything to me. Will you still visit an old woman who was too cowardly to stand up for you when you needed it? Annie's smile was warm and real. As long as you promise to help me plan a wedding that's going to be absolutely spectacular. Rose laughed, and the sound was like music. Oh, sweetheart, I have been waiting 28 years to help you plan something wonderful. As they walked toward the car, Tyler spoke up. Annie, are you okay? I know that was hard. Annie looked back at the house where she'd learned to doubt herself, then at Nathaniel, who was looking at her like she'd hung the moon, then at Tyler, who'd helped her find her courage. I'm better than okay, she said. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 6 months later, Annie stood in the bridal suite of the Fairmont Hotel, looking at herself in the mirror. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant, chosen because she loved it, not because it would photograph well or impress anyone else. Through the window, she could see the ceremony space, 200 guests who were there to celebrate, not to judge. Nathaniel's friends and colleagues, Annie's students and their families, Tyler's new classmates from his early admission program at MIT. And in the front row, Grandma Rose, beaming with pride. Her parents were there too, in the second row, looking uncomfortable but present. The past 6 months hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations, tentative apologies, gradual rebuilding of trust. But they were trying, and that was enough for now. Sophia was notably absent. She'd chosen to spend the wedding weekend in Europe, claiming a business trip that everyone knew was an excuse. But Tyler had shown Annie the card that arrived that morning. No signature, just 2 words. Be happy. It was progress. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Annie, it's time. Tyler stood in the doorway, resplendent in his tuxedo, his face bright with joy. In the 6 months since moving in with them, he'd transformed from an angry, grieving teenager into a confident young man with a bright future. MIT was just the beginning. He'd already been accepted into their advanced computer science program, and 3 professors were fighting over who got to mentor him. Ready? He asked. More than ready. Tyler offered her his arm. He'd asked to walk her down the aisle, and Annie couldn't imagine anyone she'd rather have by her side. As they reached the ceremony space, the music swelled, and Annie saw Nathaniel waiting for her at the altar. His face when he saw her was radiant with love and awe, and Annie felt her heart expand with certainty. This was real. This was hers. This was worth fighting for. As Tyler placed her hand in Nathaniel's, he whispered, "Thank you for saving us all." "Thank you for teaching me to save myself," Annie whispered back. The ceremony was beautiful, but it was the reception that truly mattered. Annie danced with her husband, with Tyler, with students who'd become like family. She gave a speech thanking everyone who'd supported her journey, who'd believed in her potential, who'd helped her find the courage to choose herself. She didn't mention the family members who hadn't made that list. She didn't need to. As the evening wound down, Nathaniel pulled her aside. "Mrs. Brooke," he said, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that," Annie laughed. "Ready for our next adventure? What did you have in mind?" Nathaniel's smile was mysterious. "Tyler's been accepted to a summer program at Oxford. He wants to study AI ethics." "That's wonderful, but..." He asked if we'd consider moving to London for a year so he can do the program while still living with us. Annie's eyes widened. London? Think about it. You could expand your business internationally. I can work from anywhere. Tyler gets to spread his wings while staying close to family. The possibilities bloomed in Annie's mind. New students to help, new challenges to embrace, new adventures to share with the family they'd chosen. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. As Nathaniel spun her around the dance floor, Annie caught sight of herself in the ballroom mirrors. The woman looking back at her was confident, radiant, unafraid. She was everything Annie had always been capable of becoming, once she'd stopped letting other people define her worth. The music swelled around them, and Annie realized that this wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of everything she'd never dared to dream possible. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the city in fresh possibility. And Annie Huang Brook, entrepreneur, educator, wife, chosen family member, danced with her husband and knew that the best chapters of her story were still being written. Some families are born. Others are built by people brave enough to choose love over fear, growth over comfort, and themselves over the expectations of others. Annie had found hers, and she was never letting go. What did this story teach you about the difference between love that lifts you up and control that tears you down? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.